Well, very good to talk to you, Mr. Ambassador. Just before we start on the substance of the interview, I want to put what we're about to hear from you today into context, because you'll remember the last time we spoke was on January the 11th at the beginning of this year. In that interview, I asked you what 150,000 Russian troops were doing on the border around Ukraine. Did they have any intention of invading? To which you replied to me, in the current and foreseeable future, we have no intention to do that. To be blunt, Mr. Ambassador, you were deliberately misleading me. In fact, that was a lie.
You can consider it as what you said, but I have said what I did know at that moment. And I can assure you that every ambassadors all around the world, Russian ambassadors, had only the same knowledge about that.
6 weeks after that interview, Russian forces invaded Ukraine, and you're telling me that the Kremlin's representative in London, a key diplomatic posting, is not aware of its own foreign policy.
Well, it is not for the first time I'm being asked this question. Of course not. This was a military operation, and well, in no country people has kind of advertising in beforehand the military operations like that.
But the plans were clearly in place and you were not told.
Well, this is not a surprise to me.
Does this happen with many other areas?
I can remember things in the Security Council before a major nuclear explosion, where our minister was Gromyko at that time, very many years ago, who was not aware of that either.
Were you embarrassed then by that, by the fact that you had to go out, and it wasn't just me, of course, to the British media, you had to go out and lie? You were misled by the Kremlin.
No, we have to avoid this kind of wording, lies and don't lies. There are a lot of lies on behalf of your government about the military operation, because total absence of knowledge about that, about what is happening in Ukraine, because there is only a unilateral supply of information for your government and for British public. British public is not aware of that either.
It's interesting, though, the parallels with what's happening. I want to get your views on the change of administration, the resignation of Boris Johnson, because one of the main reasons that his party has turned upon him, because he sent ministers out in public having misled them, and they felt that they were being asked to lie on his behalf. That's as it may be. You must be glad, Russia must be glad to see the back of Boris Johnson because of his solid support for President Zelensky and Ukraine.
I can see that Boris Johnson is leaving, as for us, the worst possible impression, in the sense that he sticks to the policy that Russia should be defeated and Ukraine will win. This was totally wrong. This is miscalculation, strategic miscalculation of what is happening over there, because potentials of Ukraine, both in economic terms and in military terms, are incomparable. Russia is winning, and winning pretty quickly, terrain and so on. UK is trying to supply weapons to Ukraine. The longer it will supply weapons to Ukraine, the more suffering of Ukraine it will be, and more goals we are going to achieve.
But it's very unlikely that whoever takes over as British Prime Minister is going to change that approach, that Putin must fail. There are those in the administration now who say he is a war criminal. There are those that say that Russia must leave the entirety of Ukraine, including Crimea, and that there must be members of the Russian forces appearing before war crimes tribunals.
Well, first and foremost, we have a record of crimes that has been committed during 8 years when Ukrainians were bombing Donbass, shelling innocent people over there, killing peaceful citizens, and they continue to do the same. Now in the area of Kharkov, in the south of Ukraine, in Donbass specifically, it continues for 8 years. We have this record, and we will apply to that.
Well, I just wanted to make the point that you're accepting that war crimes are taking place, that you're accusing the Ukrainian side. Perhaps it should be for a court to decide about the Ukrainians and the Russians when it comes to war crimes.
As I have said, we have a long record of Ukrainian crimes committed after coup d'etat over there and during a civil war which continued for 8 years, shelling, bombing, killing civilian people, innocent people over there. So This is one thing. So the other thing which you have asked me is about, so it is clear by now that Ukraine is losing grounds and we are gaining grounds in Donbass. And actually, for me, it is interesting what will be the exit strategy of UK government if it will continue to repeat that Ukraine should prevail.
Can I ask you then?
It is simply unrealistic.
Can I ask you then, in terms of the territorial gains that Russia is making in the Donbass, if it should capture the entirety of the Donbass, is there likelihood of a ceasefire? Is this the way Russia sees it? This is the way the war could end?
I do not know, frankly speaking. That all depends on, we have suggested many times negotiations, and Ukraine can stop the war next day if it will cease offenses, pull down weapons, and say, let's negotiate. In fact, what do you want? And they know what we want, actually.
Well, just be explicit, because so therefore Russia does no longer want the fall of the Zelensky regime. Russia no longer desires to capture Kiev and the entirety of Ukraine.
None of our leaders, neither the president nor the others, have seen that we would like to turn over the Zelensky or his team. We have differences with them, but they are negotiable.
Let me ask you about specific issues around, particularly right now, and this affects the entirety of the world. The issue of Ukrainian grain. The UN estimates that 400 million people globally depend upon wheat and grain from Ukraine to feed them. It's currently blockaded. There are talks, we know, making some progress. Can you update us on the Russian position? How likely is it that Russia will allow exports of Ukrainian grain soon?
The problem is extremely exaggerated. Ukraine is producing about 1% of the wheat in the whole earth. It is exporting about 8% of it. So we are exporting twice as much as Ukraine, for instance. We are not against, we do not put obstacles for Ukraine for exportation of grain from its port of Odessa and so. Yesterday in Turkey, there was a meeting, four-part meeting, together with the United Nations as a lead. Next week, it will be another meeting to finalize an agreement, and we just demonstrate our goodwill. So the issue is now to demine the entry to Odessa port and Nikolaev port. The mining can be done only by the Ukrainians, because Ukrainians has put mines over there.
And if Ukrainian ships, maritime ships, merchant ships, carrying grain want to have NATO escorts, will Russia allow that?
I don't think so. We cannot turn the Black Sea into and allow NATO ships over there, and neither Turkey will allow this. It is under international law, the military ships cannot pass without permission of Turkey over there.
But if you're saying if Ukraine demines the area around the port of Odessa, their merchant ships are free to sail.
Merchant ships will be escorted, I do think, and this is now on the negotiation table but Turks will take part in it. We are establishing a control center in Turkey right now, which will follow this.
Gas. Nord Stream 1, the pipeline to Germany, is closed for maintenance at the moment. There are fears in Europe that it actually won't reopen, that this will be Russia exerting more pressure on the European Union.
Difficult to say. What is happening is a normal situation. The technical maintenance is already going on during this time of the year. But on the other hand, one should understand that it is not us, but this is European Union who said by the year 2030 they will totally minimize consumption of gas, oil, energy from Russia, and by this year they will terminate it. So they are gradually reducing consumption of our energy sources and issues. Now, of course, we would like to fulfill all our contracts, and we have a reputation of reliable supplier, and we will continue to supply that. But on the other hand, we should also take measures to find some alternatives, because by this time, when they are reducing it, we need to find other markets for this. And please take into account that we didn't start yet our counter-sanctioning. We are sanctioned quite a lot by the European Union in different fields. Our government is, of course, preparing measures for counter-sanctioning. This is clear. The trade volume between European Union and Russia this year is about $280 billion. So we are interrelated, but we may stick to this policy. So of course, sooner or later, we will have to take measures.
Can I ask you, Mr. Ambassador, about the situation with the two Britons, and there are others, two Britons who are fighting amongst and with as members of the Ukrainian forces who were captured by Russian separatists in the Donbass and sentenced to death, Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner. Is Russia putting influence upon those supporters of Russia in the Donbass to at least commute those sentences? Of course, Russia does not carry out the death sentence.
As to my knowledge, they have put a notice of appeal to the court in Donbass, and it is under consideration, and depending on the issue, it will be the result. But so far, UK government did not address us and did not approach us with a demand that we should intervene. It will be, of course, a bit awkward to think that due to the position that UK government is now taking, adversarial position to us, that we deliberately will advocate something on behalf of the UK government in front of Donbass.
And just to get back to the UK government, the change at the top, and there will presumably be a change in many of the major positions as well. What attitude would Russia like to see the UK take towards it and the conflict in Ukraine?
It should be, first of all, realistic, because the conflict will not continue forever. The conflict will end, and the conflict may end pretty soon, because if, of course, UK will understand that there is no possibility to win over Russia, but the conflict will be prolonged if UK will continue to supply arms, which are now being used also for shelling cities and civilian people in Donbass and in the other areas. And the more UK will send weapons, the longer will be the conflict, because they are encouraging Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian authorities, not soldiers, but authorities, to continue the conflict.
I want to just ask you about those weapons that are being supplied, of course, not just by the United Kingdom. And we hear from Russia today there's been another strike where Russia claims that 12 people have been killed, and that the United States, the United Kingdom, the West are conducting hybrid warfare. You say that the war may soon end, but it could escalate then, could it not, if Russia decides that it wants to attack, for instance, where those weapons are being assembled, supplied, where the training is taking place? It could go beyond the borders of Ukraine.
Well, our militaries, they are striking only goals, and they are achieving goals only on the territory of Ukraine. But if it is foreign weapons being sent or mercenaries are being trained on the territory of Ukraine only, then of course this is a legitimate military target for us.
And in terms, I just want to talk about escalation, because it is a very hot war in the heart of Europe. Russia has said in the past, has mentioned, has informed the world about the scale of its nuclear capability. President Putin says that Russia will use such weapons to defend its sovereignty, to defend the sovereignty of Russian territory. Russian territory does include Crimea, does it, in Russia's estimation?
We have a military doctrine, and the answer lays in this military doctrine. There are two options when we may use the nuclear weapons. One is that we are being attacked by the nuclear forces from abroad, and the other if conventional attack is so heavy that it endangers our existence of Russia.
So if a conventional attack on Crimea was so heavy, what would happen?
I don't think so. This is not a type of a conflict of will, but I have no answer. It should be addressed to the Ministry of Defense.
Last specific question, and it's back to Mr. Johnson. And there's a mystery in this country. Perhaps you can help us with it. That last week the Prime Minister mentioned to one of the senior committees at the House of Commons that he met Alexander Lebedev, who you'll be familiar with, a former KGB agent resident in this country. He met him in Italy in April 2018, a few days after a NATO meeting, without his officials there. It was suggested that Mr. Lebedev tried to get Mr. Johnson to have a conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov. Russia, the Kremlin must have been aware of that meeting.
Perhaps I have no idea. At that time, I have been busy with totally different things at all. I read in your newspapers about that, but I know that by this time, in 2018, Mr. Lebedev, he was a banker for very many years, and has not much to do with the government.
So there was no, then, he was not a conduit for the Russian administration?
That depends. If I will say something, then you will tell me next time that this is a lie, so, but I simply do not know.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dermot.